Okay, today's daf is Nun Chet. We're going to start on Nun Zayin Amud Bet at the 2 dots, which is about, I would say, 10 lines from the bottom, maybe 9. Where it says Irad Dam Apar Letuchtam Sa'ir. So this is quoting from the Mishnah. We know the procedure. So the Kohen Gadol goes into the Kodesh HaKodeshim first to bring the Ketoret, then he brings in the blood of the Sa'ir of the par of his bull, and does the blood sprinkling. Then he brings the blood of the Sa'ir of the goat and does the blood sprinkling. Then he sprinkles again outside the Kodesh HaKodeshim in the Kodesh. He sprinkles his blood again, in other words, the blood of the par, and then again the blood of the Sa'ir, the blood of the goat. And then he applies both the blood of the par and the Sa'ir to the Mizbeach HaZahav, the golden altar which is inside the Kodesh. So these are the various steps. And when he does that, there are several applications that he makes. He applies the blood to the corners of the Mizbeach HaZahav, and he also applies the blood to the center. We're going to see. Now, the Gemara says, Tanan keman da'amar ma'arvin lekranot. So the question is, when does he mix the blood of the par and Sa'ir? Because we know when he goes into the Kodesh HaKodeshim, he applies them separately, because first he does the par, then he brings the Sa'ir. When he does it on the Parochet, which is in the Kodesh, outside of the Kodesh HaKodeshim, he first sprinkles par, then Sa'ir separately. When he puts it onto the Mizbeach, onto the golden altar, what does he do? Does he mix it and then apply it? Or does he apply it first to the golden altar, first par, then Sa'ir? Which one is it? So the Gemara says, Tanan keman damar ma'arvin lekranot. So our Mishnah supports the view that he mixes them together and then applies the blood to the Mizbeach. He mixes them together first. The Itmar, because it was stated as a machloket, Rabbi Yoshia and Rabbi Yonatan. Chad amar me'arvin v'chad amar in me'arvin. Rabbi Yoshia and Rabbi Yonatan had a machloket. They had an argument. One said first he should mix the blood of the bull and the goat, and then he should apply it to the Mizbeach, the golden Mizbeach. The other one said no. He should apply them separately. Tistayem de Rabbi Yoshiahu da amar me'arvin. We should conclude that it was actually Rabbi Yoshia who said that you mix them first. De amar af al gav de lo ketiv yahdav keman dechtiv yahdav dameh. Because in general, Rabbi Yoshia has a position. The question is, when the Torah tells us two things. The example is given in Rashi here. The Torah tells us, Ish asher yikalel et aviv ve'et imo. If a person curses his father and mother, then he's going to die, right? Now, Enli ela aviv, I'm reading from the Rashi. So what it says in Masechet Sanhedrin, in a braita that's brought there, how do I know that aviv below imo below aviv? Right? It only says aviv ve'imo. If you curse your mother and father together, you get the death penalty. What about if I only curse the father, only the mother? So that's why it comes back and repeats. Talmud Amar, aviv kilel imo kilel. In other words, that's why it says at the end of the pasuk, aviv ve'imo kilel. It emphasizes it again to tell you that either one is equal. In other words, it doesn't have to be both. That's Divrei Rabbi Yoshia. So what does Rabbi Yoshia interpret? Rabbi Yoshia says, whenever two things are mentioned together, we assume they have to be combined, unless the pasuk comes and tells you to separate them. So if we only had the first half of the pasuk about cursing the parents, and it said a person who curses his father and mother is going to be put to death, we would take that to mean both of them. You have to curse both of them. But the pasuk comes and fixes it, right? So to here, what would he say? That since the Torah says you should take midam hapar midam hasair, you should take from the blood of the par and from the blood of the goat and put it on karnot hamizbeach, on the altar, on the golden altar. Okay? So since it says the two of them, what do we assume? It means combined. Not one and then the other one, but together. That's Rabbi Yoshia. Rabbi Yonatan in the Braita and Masechet Sanhedrin says, Mashma shneim ke'achad, u'mashma kol echad ve'achad. Rabbi Yonatan has the opposite opinion. He says, unless the Torah tells you together, in other words, if it says, Ish asher yikalel et aviv yatimo yahdav, if it said the word yahdav together, then we would assume. But if it just says aviv ve'imo, it could be that it means two different things. For example, when it says a person steals shor oseh. Right? If he steals and it says utva, and he either utvacho umcharo, right? And he slaughters it or he sells it. It doesn't mean he does both, right? So sometimes when the Torah says and, it means either this or this, right? It doesn't mean together. So here, yachdav is not written, so we would say that they're separate. So the Gemara is saying, Rabbi Yoshia, just like he says in general, that whenever two things are connected by a vav, we say this and this, it means both of them together, unless the Torah tells you each one separately. And Rabbi Yonatan says the opposite. He says, whenever two things are mentioned, we assume it means separately, unless the Torah says yachdav, together. So here too, what would we say? According to Rabbi Yoshia, what would we say? We would say that since it says midam aparo, midam sa'ir, it means together. Since the Torah doesn't tell you to separate it, so you have to mix it together. Rabbi Yonatan would say, no, it says midam aparo, midam sa'ir, two separate things. It didn't say yachdav, didn't say put them together. The Gemara says, wait a second, afilu tema Rabbi Yonatan. Maybe here, even Rabbi Yonatan will agree that we have to combine the blood. How can you know that Rabbi Yonatan would say they could be separate? Because shaniacha dichtiv achat. Because it's possible, because here it says in the Torah, achat, one. V'chiper, it says that he is going to, what's the whole pasuk and have? Is this have here? Yeah. V'chiper Aharon al karnotav achat bashana. It says he will atone for the corners of the altar achat bashana, once in a year. Achat means it's one action. If he does first dam hapar and then he does dam ha'sa'ir, first he does the blood of the bull, then he does the blood of the goat, that's two applications. Maybe by the Torah saying achat bashana, it means it has to be combined. So maybe even Rabbi Yonatan would agree it has to be combined. So we can't prove that Rabbi Yonatan is the one who says that you apply them separately, and that Rabbi Yoshia is the one who says you put them together. However, the Gemara says, Tanya de la kishinuyan. But really, at the end of the day, the Braita explicitly tells us that it's Rabbi Yoshia that says that the blood should be combined, and that it's Rabbi Yonatan that says it should be separate, because it says in a Braita, "V'lakach midam aparum midam ha'sa'ir, sheyu me'oravin." The Rabbi Yoshia. Rabbi Yoshia says that from the pasuk, the vav that says this and this means combine them, just like he says with regard to everywhere else in the Torah that we assume that this and this means combined, unless we're informed otherwise. And Rabbi Yonatan Omer, as we turn to Nun Chet Amud Aleph, Rabbi Yonatan says that each one is applied separately. Why? Because Rabbi Yonatan generally says, he doesn't make an exception here. He doesn't use the word achat to say to combine them. He's following his general rule. What's the general rule of Rabbi Yonatan? When it says X and Y, it means this separately and this separately. It doesn't mean together.
Well, you can't use Gezerah Shava, for the other two previous applications. He did
that they were together?
No, they were separate. He does par, seir.
Oh, you mean that they were, yeah. They know when to do a Gezerah Shava, we don't know when. So if they don't do it, that means that it wasn't done. We don't always understand the what they call the Chokhmat HaKatuv. We don't always know what the reasons are why when it's appropriate to use certain ones. They might have understood that these are different phenomena and they're not comparable for some reason that we don't know. So Amar la Rabbi Yoshia tries to convince Rabbi Yonatan of his position. He says, "V'halo kvar nemar achat." Doesn't it say v'chiper Aharon al karnotav achat bashana, that the Aharon is going to atone for the corners of the altar once a year? Once, it means one application. Combine them and put one. Rabbi Yonatan answered him, "Amar lo Rabbi Yonatan, v'halo kvar nemar midam aparo midam ha'sa'ir." But it separates them. It doesn't just say min hadam. Right? It could have said just from the blood you should put on the mizbeach. Didn't have to say from the blood of the par, from the blood of the sa'ir. From the fact that it separates them out, it means independently. Im ken lama nemar achat. So, if that's true, why then is the word achat? What does Rabbi Yonatan do with the word achat then? Lomar lechat, to tell you. Achat v'lo shtayim midam apar, achat v'lo shtayim midam ha'sa'ir. One and not two from each of them. In other words, don't apply the par twice and the sa'ir twice. And why would you think that? Now here comes your Gezerah Shava. Why would you think that? Because so far what did he do? He applied the par twice, once inside the Kodesh HaKodeshim, once outside. He applied the sa'ir twice, once inside the Kodesh HaKodeshim, once outside. So maybe you would think on the Mizbeach, he should apply twice with the par and twice with the sa'ir to make it even, right? So the answer is no. He doesn't do that. He only does it once from each. Tanya idach, another Braita says, that the Braita says, and this supports our Mishnah as well, that you should take from the blood of the par and from the blood of the sa'ir, that they have to be mixed together. You're telling me that they have to be mixed together before they're applied to the golden altar. Maybe that's not true. Maybe they should be placed each one separately, just like in the Kodesh HaKodeshim. It was par, then sa'ir. It was bull, then goat. On the parochet, it was bull, then goat. Maybe on the Mizbeach HaZahav, it's also bull, then goat. How do you know that's not true? The conclusion is, Talmud Lamar, the Pasuk tells us, achat. That's what the Pasuk tells you, the word achat. Ustamma ke Rabbi Yoshia. And this is a stamma, this is a stam, anonymous statement ke Rabbi Yoshia that supports Rabbi Yoshia's position, and also our Mishnah supports Rabbi Yoshia's position that the blood is mixed together prior to being applied to the golden altar. So now, Natan Tamale Barekan, it then tells us that they poured the blood one into the other, as we saw in the Mishnah. The exact wording of the Mishnah we can take a look at again. The exact wording of the Mishnah was that they pour the blood one into the other. He takes the blood, irad dam apar letoch dam ha'sa'ir, he pours the blood of the bull into the blood of the goat, v'natan et hamaler barekan, and he puts the full into the empty. Okay? So the Gemara, we're going to see how it interprets that last phrase, puts the full into the empty, in just a second. So they asked, Ba'amine Rami Bar Hama me Rav Chisda. Rami Bar Hama asked Rav Chisda a question. Hiniach mizrak betoch mizrak v'kibel bo et adam. Mahu. A general question, not immediately relevant to Yom Kippur. He asked, listen, what if a person has two kelim put together? You know, sometimes you take, if you take a cup or you take a plate and a paper plate and you don't realize you have two. You thought you only had one. So this guy takes the mizrak. You know, the mizrakim are the mizrak is like a thing for collecting, a receptacle for collecting the blood, and he has two instead of one. So the one that he's holding is really not he's holding the handle of the underside one, right? But what the blood is going into is the inside one, obviously. So what happens? So he asked him, Mahu min b'mino chotzetz o eno chotzetz, right? So does min b'mino chotzetz? In other words, the question is the fact that he has, let's say, two silver or gold or whatever vessels, one on top of the other, and he's holding the bottom one, is he still considered to be receiving the blood? Because you could say it's chotzetz, it's a chatzitza, it's an interruption between his hands and the collecting vessel, the receptacle that's receiving the blood is not really in his hand. He's holding the vessel under it, because he's holding the handle of the underside one. That was the question. So they tried to bring a proof from our Mishnah. Amar le'tanitua. He said, why are you asking me? It's in a Mishnah here. Natan tamale barekan. It says that he pours the blood pours the blood of the bull into the blood of the goat. And then v'natan tamale barekan sounds like what it means is you take the full container. In other words, what did you do? You took the par blood and you poured it into the sa'ir blood, into the goat blood, and mixed it together, right? Now you have only one container with blood in it. What's the other one? Empty. And it says v'natan tamale barekan. Take the full one and put it into the empty one. So now you're holding the empty one from the bottom, really, but you have the full one inside, and you're applying the blood with the two together. So there you see. You see that it's not an interposition. It's not a chatzitza, because he's holding one vessel, but he's applying with the other vessel. The inner vessel contains the blood. He's holding the underside vessel. They said to him, so he says, "My lav hoshiv mizrak malel letoch mizrak rekan." Doesn't this mean that what they did was they took the container that's now full of blood and put it into the empty one in order to consolidate space, right? He's holding both of them. And therefore that shows it's not a chatzitza. However, the Gemara says, lo, that's not what it means, Rav Chisda. Ira mizrak maleh letoch mizrak rekan. What it means to say is that what they did was, first they poured the bull blood into the sa'ir blood, into the goat blood. And then what did they do? In order to mix it better, what can you do? Have you ever seen how they make those drinks? You know, there's a bartender. You pour it back into the empty. So what it means is, first you pour the blood of the par into the blood of the goat. Then you take the mix and you pour it back into the empty. V'natana tamale barekan. You put it back. And what does that mean? Now you have the mixed better, just like when they mix those drinks, you know, in the bar, right? So so that's what it means. And Tana le Resha. Okay, Hatana le Resha, Ira dama par letoch dama sa'ir. But didn't we already have this? Didn't we already have that we poured the blood of the bull into the blood of the goat? No, kedei la'aravan yafeh yafeh. But you know what? Pouring it one time doesn't work as well as pouring it twice. In other words, so by pouring it first, the bull into the goat, that's one level, but that's not going to mix it so well. If you want to really mix it, pour it back into the empty, and now it's really going to mix well, and that's why they had to do it twice. Now there's a whole discussion in Tosafot at the bottom of min b'mino chotzet or eno chotzet regarding lulav, the way that we do lulav, and how what do many people use? They use those what do you call it? The handles that they make from the same material. It's min b'mino. It's min b'mino because it's the same type. It's made from lulav. Those handles. So there's a whole question that Tosafot deals with here. Doesn't the Gemara say in Masechet Sukkah that min b'mino eno chotzetz, that you're allowed to use a handle? So he differentiates it. He says, well, that's talking about, one of the answers he gives is that basically that's talking about a case where the handle is designed to be a handle. In other words, it's designed to hold the thing. But here you're just taking one pot and putting one pot in another pot. The pot on the bottom is not designed to hold the pot on the top. He also says that you are holding it most likely, since you're not necessarily holding it from the handle position. You're holding it also from underneath. He gives other ways of distinguishing between the two cases. But the main point is that when it's something that's fashioned to be a handle, that seems to be the primary answer. That's different than when you simply place one thing in another and the thing underneath is not really connected to the thing on top at all. It's just a random extraneous piece that doesn't need to be there. But in any case, it didn't resolve the question yet. Tashma, come and listen. That haya omed al gabe keli or al gabe regel havero pasul. We know that the kohen, in order to do the avodah, has to be standing on the floor of the Beit HaMikdash. He can't be standing on anything else. What happens if he's standing on a vessel? He's a short kohen. He can't reach that high, so he puts down, a little bucket or something, turns over a bucket and stands on the bucket. That's not good. He can't do that. He has to stand on the floor, or he stands on the foot of his friend. Al gabe regel havero pasul. It's no good. Now, what does that show you? Now you might say, well, look, that's min b'mino, because it's legs. My foot is on somebody else's foot, min b'mino, and it says pasul, chotzetz. It's an interruption between my foot and the ground. So that's a proof. That's min b'mino chotzetz. The Gemara says, no, shanei regel. You can't compare a person's foot. You can't say, my friend's foot is nullified by me standing on it. No, your friend is saying, get off my foot. Right? It's not something that you can say is nullified. But here, what did you do? You intentionally put one vessel under the other vessel. You're nullifying the vessel underneath. You're combining them. You're making it a carrier for the vessel on top. That's a totally different story. You can't say my friend's foot is a carrier for me. No, it's your friend's foot. So, therefore, that's not a good proof. This is what they asked. Derech sherut bechach or en derech sherut bechach. They didn't question whether it was a chotzetz. They said, you know what? It's not chotzetz. We know from Masechet Sukkah, the same thing. You have two of the same thing. It's not chotzetz. It's not considered an interruption between your hand and the vessel. But is it derech sherut bechach? Is it kavod? In other words, let's say, for example, let's just give an example, that somebody came to serve you at a fancy restaurant, and you see that the serving platter, underneath the serving platter that they bring to you, is another dirty platter that was emptied of the previous person's food, and they put it underneath the serving platter and they came to serve you. So your serving platter is clean, it just has your food, but the waiter is holding, underneath your serving. He didn't want to have to carry two platters, one back to the kitchen, He's going to have to carry yours anyway. So what did he do? He put all of your delicious food on a serving platter, and he put it on, and he had already used the other serving platter to serve the other table. He puts your serving platter on top of the dirty one, right? And he brings it out to you. So he doesn't, and then he's going to bring them both back. Is that nice? That's the question. Derech sherut b'chach. Is that kavod that you're going to bring? You emptied out this container of blood into the other one. So it's empty, it's got residue in there and everything, and then you take the full one and you put it inside. Is that nice? That's the question. Derech kavod b'chach or lo? Right, derech sherut. Is this the way of serving God or not? Is it proper to do so? And so that was really the question. Not about the interposition. Interposition, maybe technically it's okay, but is it appropriate to do that? Tashma, come and listen. The Tanadvei Rabbi Ishmael, that the Yeshiva of Rabbi Ishmael taught. Et kol kelei hasharet asher yisharetu vam bakodesh. That it says, all of the klei sharet, all of the vessels of service that you serve bam, with them, bakodesh, which means shenei kelim b'shirut achat, that it's legitimate, it's acceptable to double up, in a case like ours, to have a double keli, a double vessel, for one service. So even though it might not seem on the surface to be the most respectable way to do it, it satisfies the requirements and it's allowed. It's permitted.
Okay? Kodesh, there is only himself, so he needs help. I mean, he only got two hands. He's got to be able to.
Well, he has that stand to rest stuff on, so he could put it down. He doesn't have to do it. So you see, it's derech sherut bechach. It could be that it's acceptable. Ba'amine Rami Bar Chama Rav Chisda. Rami Bar Chama had another question for Rav Chisda. Hini achsiv betoch hamizrak v'kibel bo et adamahu. What if a person took sieve? Sieve is like a, what do they call it? Yeah, it's a soft piece.
Like growth.
It's something that grows around the palm tree. So it grows around the decal, around the palm tree. So it's an organic material. It's porous. Okay, so things will pass through it. But let's say you put down a nice sheet, like a baking sheet, something like that. You put this porous thing down in the bottom of the mizrak, and you receive the blood in the container, but it has this extra layer inside. So what's the question? Why is he even asking this? Because, on one hand, you have an extraneous thing. It's not like the first case where you had the same thing. You took a silver vessel and you put it inside a silver vessel. It's at least the same thing. We could see them as merging together into one. But here you have a piece of leaf inside, let's say, inside the mizrak, basically. So what is that doing in there? Oh, eno chotzetz. Okay, and what is and now he expands on his question. Perhaps because it's porous. In other words, it's not going to stop the blood it'll flow right through it. Okay, it's not going to hold the blood itself. It's not a container in and of itself, because the blood will pass through. Right. So it's not going to really take away from the mizrak at all. So maybe it wouldn't be a chatzita, or maybe it doesn't matter. You can't have any foreign substance in there. And Amar Le, he said to him, Tanena, we already learned zolef veholech ad shemagia lasafog. He says that he brings a proof from the case of the mechatat, the case of the water that was sanctified for the para aduma. What did they do with the water of the para aduma? Well, one of the things that they used to have was they would have the Rashi on the side. The Rashi explains from Masechet Para that they would have a certain vessel, which was actually a stone kind of almost like a well or something like that, but it's really not. It was like it almost looked like a trough that animals would come up to, and this is where they would have the water. And there was a sponge on the bottom. Okay, now this stone container would have water coming from a live source. In other words, mayim chaim. It would have a flowing, natural source of water going into it, but there was a sponge on the bottom. So what it says is, zolef ve'olech ad shemagel safog, means anything above. We don't consider the fact that there's a sponge at the bottom of that container to be an added extraneous thing. How do you see that? Because the water has to be contained in a vessel. It has to be contained in a vessel that sanctifies the water for proper use. Now, if you consider having some foreign substance in there to be a disqualifier, that the water is not really resting inside the vessel because it's resting on top of the sponge, so then you wouldn't be able to use that water anymore. And yet you see, it says zolef veholech ad shemagel safog, that you can continue to take the water off the top until you reach the sponge. The water that's absorbed in the sponge you can't use, but the fact that there's a sponge on the bottom of this vessel does not disqualify the water. So too, says Rav Chisda, just because you have a leaf on the bottom of your mizrak does not disqualify the blood that was received in the mizrak. True, you can't take the leaf out and start spritzing the blood like that, but you don't say that it's not resting in the vessel just because there's a leaf, because a leaf is porous. The leaf doesn't ruin the water. The
blood in it to begin with.
What?
If it's not part of the process, what is it doing?
I don't know, it fell in, who knows, maybe it fell in. So, it's a theoretical question. So, Shani Maya, de Kalishi. So he said, I don't buy that proof. That's not a good proof. Because water is different than blood. Right? They say, what do they say? Blood is thicker than water, right? That's the saying, right? So water, true, water can pass through things. Water, can travel easily through different substances. So we assume that the water is traveling back and forth in that vessel despite having a sponge type of thing in there. But blood coagulates and sticks to things and gets stuck. And therefore we assume, Rashi says, V'yotzot mikol avarav v'nichnasot bino levena keli aval dam avu. The blood is thick. So actually what will happen is it can't penetrate through the leaf or through the sieve, whatever it is, through that piece of organic material. It can't penetrate, it's too thick. Water would be able to pass through and go back and forth, but blood won't be able to. Blood, what?
More viscous.
Right, it's more viscous, exactly. Blood is not going to be able to move, and therefore we can't bring a proof from water. That this was the conclusion. Badam kasher, bakometz pasul. It depends what you're dealing with. If you're dealing with blood, receiving blood in the vessel, there, having a leaf or having this kind of an entity, is organic porous entity at the bottom of the vessel, is not a disqualifier. But kometz, if it's the vessel, remember when they would bring a flour offering, what they would do was they would take the handful from the flour offering and they would put it in a vessel, and then they would take it up to burn it on the mizbeach. When you take that handful and you're going to put it in a vessel, it has to be directly in the vessel. There can't be anything in there. Why? Because it's a solid, right? It's a solid, so it's resting not on the floor of the vessel. It's resting on the sieve. It's resting on the leaf. And that's not acceptable. It's not like blood that will flow back and forth through and across and between the leaf and the vessel. And that's the distinction, that is the final distinction brought in the Gemara, that bidam kasher b'kometz pasul, that if you're dealing with receiving blood, having that leaf on the bottom is not a problem. If you're dealing with flour, it is a problem. And we turn to Nonchet Amud Bet for the new Mishnah. Next step in the Avodah here, V'yatza lamizbeach shelefnei Hashem, when it describes the Kohen coming out from the Kodesh HaKodashim, from having applied the blood first to inside the Kodesh HaKodashim, and then to the Parochet, it says V'yatza lamizbeach shelefnei Hashem. Then he goes out to the Mizbeach. Now the question, of course, is he doesn't really go out he doesn't go out because he already came out of the Kodesh HaKodashim and he was applying the blood to the parochet. So he's already out. And he wants to go to which mizbeach? The golden one. So why does he have to go out? He doesn't have to go out. He's in the Kodesh. That's where the mizbeach is. The golden mizbeach is there. So it says, Zeh mizbeach hazahav. This is not talking about, in other words, you might think that what is the Torah telling you? That he has to go to the outer mizbeach. Because it says, V'yatzai la mizbeach. So it says, no. It means the one inside, not the one outside. Hitchil mechateh v'yored. He starts purifying, okay? Mechateh here means in the sense of purifying. Okay? And the way, now there's a little bit of a machloket, how the blood was applied. Rashi, which is the easiest to follow because he runs along with the Gemara, is that the blood was applied to the corners of the altar with the finger smearing it on. Okay? Smearing it on. Not sprinkling it onto and then it's sprinkled on top of the altar at the end, but it's smeared on with the finger according to Rashi. So he began, me'echanu matchil. Where does he start applying the blood? Okay? Now, it's important to read what Rashi says when he says mechatev yored. He says that what he would do is, he would do milmala lemata. He would always do from up to down. That's why it says mechatev yored. He would go down. Why? Ki yechid lo nitvaseh maneh, Rashi says. That he would, the concern is that if he goes down to up, he's going to get dirty. He's going to get his clothes dirty. Okay, so if you read the Rashi there in the second line of Rashi, so towards the end, Shemizbeach gavo amatayim, because this mizbeach is only 2 amot tall. Remember, the mizbeach is short; it's not tall. ואי אפשר לצדד ראשי אצבעותיו למטה ולתת למתנה בקרן מלמטה למעלה. Okay, and it's ועל כורחו ראשי אצבעותיו למעלה. Okay, his fingers are going to be above. וכשהוא נותן באצבע כנגד חודה של קרן ונותן מתנה ארוכה ומשוחה, אם מושך מלמטה למעלה, הדם זב לתוך בית יד כתונת שלו. In other words, if he tries to go up, what's going to happen? The blood is going to drip onto his own arm. So he wants to do this, so his arm is away from what he's doing. In other words, if you do this way, you're keeping your arm away. If you do this way, then your shirt is going to be closer to what you're doing. It's going to drip back onto you. That's the concern. It's going to drip back onto his sleeve. He wants to keep his hand like this. So if it drips, he goes downward, it drips away from him. If he does this, if it drips, it's going to drip onto his shirt. He doesn't want that.
Is it assuming the blood mixed or not mixed?
The blood is mixed, according to this assumption. Yeah.
So how he picks the blood?
He dips his finger in.
Oh,
and then he has to put it on.
One finger?
One finger. And then if he goes upwards, if he goes upwards, the concern is it's going to get on him. If he goes downwards, it's better. Right? Yeah, with finger. So. Where's he going to start? He starts from the northeast corner. Now you have to envision where is the Mizbeach here so we can all have a picture. So when you walk into the Kodesh, as we've always said, you're facing west. Okay, which means to your right is north and to your left is south. So therefore, if you think northeast means that you are, when you walk if you were walking into the Kodesh, it would be immediately to your right. Okay, immediately to your right. Because it would be it's closest to the entrance, and it's to the right of the person who enters. Oh, they have a picture? Yeah. I get confused with those pictures. It just makes more sense in my brain. Sometimes, yeah. So you start from the northeast, then you go tzfonit ma'aravit to the northwest. In other words, you walk back towards the Kohen Gadol walks back towards the Kodesh HaKodashim, right? Because that's west. So he started on the north but east. Then he walks to the Kodesh HaKodashim, back towards the Kodesh HaKodashim, towards the west. And then what does he do? So then Ma'aravit Diromit. Then he goes and he's going to make a left, basically, you could say, so to speak. Although it's considered moving to the right, because he's facing the Mizbeach. Okay, so he faces the Mizbeach at the northeast corner, and then he steps to his right, because he's facing the Mizbeach, he steps to his right to be at the northwest corner, and then he steps to his right again, towards his right arm would be the southwest corner, right? And then if he does it again, it's going to be Dromit Mizrachit, it's going to be the southeast.
Against clock?
Is it counterclockwise is what he's doing, because he's walking towards his right. He's facing his back. Right. It's counterclockwise. Exactly. So that's how he's walking. Makom shu matchil b'chatat al mizbeach hachitzon. Okay. The place where he begins with the chatat on the outer mizbeach, misham haya gomer al mizbeach hapnimi. This is where he would finish on the inner mizbeach. Okay, Rashi explains, Da'ainu b'keren dromit mizrachit, because normally in Ezehu Mekoman, what does it say? Okay, that you start from keren dromit mizrachit, but here he finishes at keren dromit mizrachit. He finishes at the southeast. The Gemara later is going to explain why that is, that there's a difference. Okay, but here he ends at southeast. Rabbi Eliezer disagrees with Tanakama. He says, Bimkomo hayomed. He doesn't walk around the mizbeach. The Mizbeach is small. The Mizbeach Hazav is small. You don't have to walk around. Right? That's right. So he doesn't walk around. Rather, what does he do? He's omed umchate. He applies the blood standing in one place. V'al kulan hayonoten milamata lemala. And all of the other spots he goes from down to up. Why? Because he's reaching over. Chutz mizo shaita lefanav shaynoten milmala lemata. Except for the one right in front of him, where he has to go from up to down because he doesn't want the blood to spill on his shirt. But in the other case, since he's reaching over anyway, he does this. From down to up, because he's reaching over. In any case, he's holding his finger down because he's reaching across. Yeah. So he doesn't have to worry that the blood is going to drip onto his shirt.
What is that matzlif?
You missed last week. We did matzlif already. Matzlif is last week. Matzlif is not this. This is the mizbeach. Matzlif is with the kodesh HaKodashim. That's onto the floor where he drips the blood on the floor. This is not matzlif. This is smearing the blood on the. Yeah, this is different. Okay. So then. And he za'al tahoro shel mizbeach. Then he sprinkles the blood on the purity of the mizbeach. Sheva pamim, 7 times. So we're going to see what tahoro shel mizbeach means. It means basically the top center of the mizbeach where things are actually burnt. Okay, not the side, not the horns of the mizbeach. It had horns around it. In other words, at corners that stuck up. The middle part is where he's going to put blood 7 times. And then he would take the blood that was left over after all the sprinkling was done. There was always blood left over. He would go to the western base of the outer mizbeach. And the thing was that if you look at the base of the mizbeach outside goes along the western side and curves around the south side of the mizbeach. Okay, so it's called the Yisod. So that piece curves around. So for a regular chatat that was done outside of the Kodesh, normally they would pour the blood on the south side of the on the south base. But here we're pouring it on the western base of the Mizbeach. We're going to see why. Elo va'elo mitarevin ba'ama. Both of these end up getting mixed into the Amma. The Amma was sort of a drainage stream that went out of the Mizbeach. V'yotzin le'nachal Kidron, and went out to the valley of Kidron. V'nimkarin le'gananin le'zabel u'mo'alin behen. We're going to see more about this later. And they would sell it to people to use for fertilizer. In other words, they would want to use this blood to fertilize their fields. But mo'alin behen, you had to give money. In other words, to remove the Kiddusha from the blood. The blood still had Kiddusha. Mu'alin behen means if you used it without paying for it to the Beit HaMikdash, then you would be considered violating Me'ilah. You would be misappropriating holy property. Now, the issue here is, of course, according to... well, we're going to see more about it in the Gemara exactly what the status of that is. But the point is that there are a few differences here in terms of the application of blood of this inner application versus the outer one. And we're going to see what the reason is. Why is it that for an outer chatat, including the one done on Yom Kippur, for an outer chatat, they pour the rest of the blood on the southern side. For the inner one, it's on the western side. We're going to see more about this in the upcoming Gemara.
I wanted to say this week there was a big article in the Post about fertilizing today.
Mm-hmm.
They give so much importance.
Yeah.
All the food they fertilize and then they sell it.
No, of course, yeah. And I guess this was used as a good fertilizer.
They need big terrains, in order to do it,
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I'm not an expert in farming, but I know that it helps. Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught v'yatzal mizbeach. So now we're going to a braita that's going. The Gemara is going to quote a couple of braitot here that are rehashing and developing some of the ideas here. So the rabbis taught v'yatzal mizbeach matal mudamar. What does it mean that he goes out to the mizbeach? Amar Rabbi Nechemia says. Because remember, he doesn't go out. He's already out. He's out of the Kodesh HaKodeshim and he's in the Kodesh. So what do you mean he goes out? So Rabbi Nechemia says, "Levi shematzinu b'para bal kol hamitzvot shekohen omed chutz lamizbeach umazeh laparochet b'shashu umazeh." Now, there's another type of chatat, by the way, that is offered inside the Kodesh, and that's called para bal kol hamitzvot. That's when the Kohen Gadol does a sin, or actually makes a halachic ruling, his own halachic ruling, and follows his own ruling. Or, para elim davar shel tzibur, where the community, where the Bet Din makes a mistaken ruling, and the people follow this ruling, and it's in a very serious area of halacha. It can't just be a minor thing. They tell everybody to do something which is a very serious violation, and they do it. And they realize the mistake. So this chatat is also brought into the Kodesh, and its blood is also sprinkled, not in the Kodesh HaKodeshim, but in the Kodesh towards the Parochet. But there's an interesting difference. That when it comes to the par that's brought al kol mitzvot, meaning the Kohen Gadol's offering when he makes a halachic mistake, or the Sanhedrin's offering, the Kohen also applies blood to the parochet, but he stands behind the Mizbeach HaZahav. In other words, remember, the Mizbeach HaZahav is in the center of the Kodesh, so when you walk in, it's in between you and the Parochet. The Parochet separates between the Kodesh and the Kodesh HaKodeshim. So you can either stand in front of the Mizbeach HaZahav, closer to the Parochet with nothing in front of you, or you can stand behind the Mizbeach HaZahav, so you're facing the Parochet, but the Mizbeach is in front of you. So with the Parabal Kol HaMitzvot, the one that's not done on Yom Kippur, the one that's done for the Kohen Gadol or for the Tzibur, during the rest of the year, he has to stand behind the Mizbeach HaZahav. Okay? He doesn't stand up close to the parochet. That's what it says. That's why he says that the parabal kol mitzvot shekohen omed chutz lamizbeach umazeh ala parochet b'shashu mazeh yachol af zeken Talmud lomar v'yatzai lamizbeach. From the fact that it tells you he has to go out to the mizbeach, it means what? That where was he standing when he applied the blood to the parochet on Yom Kippur? He was standing closer to the parochet, in front of the mizbeach, not behind it. The mizbeach was not in between him and the parochet. That's why it says v'yatzal mizbeach. Okay, so that's why it says that. So,
mizbeach?
No, he wasn't. He was in front. In other words, normally, let's say this is the mizbeach. This is for the rest of the year. If he had to bring a sin offering in the kodesh, he stands here. On Yom Kippur, he was standing here.
What's the parochet?
Right over here. So normally he has to stand behind the golden mizbeach. Now on Yom Kippur he stands in front. So when it tells you that he has to go to the mizbeach, it says v'yatza, meaning he comes out to the mizbeach. On Yom Kippur it says v'yatza, he goes to the mizbeach because the mizbeach is behind him. Okay?
Eastward.
Right, he moves eastward, exactly. Now that he has to, but in the other cases it wouldn't have to say that because he was already behind it. Okay, so that shows you. Which shows you that he was inside, he was closer in. Another bright that tells us Lifnei Hashem. Why does it have to describe the Mizbeach as Lifnei Hashem? That's what it says, right? He goes to the Mizbeach Asher Lifnei Hashem. Amar Rabbi Nehemiah, Lefi she'matzino bepar v'sa'ir sheyom kippurim shekohen omed lifnim min ha-Mizbeach u'mazeh al ha-parochet v'shashu mazeh yachol avzeken. So from the fact that on Yom Kippur it tells us that the Kohen Gadol would stand in between the Mizbeach and the Parochet when he placed the blood on the Parochet. So you might think the same thing would apply to the offering that he brings for himself the rest of the year. The Par Habal Kol HaMitzvot. Maybe you'd say he also has to stand in between the Mizbeach and the Parochet. That's why Talmud Lamar Mizbach Ketoret Hasamim Lifnei Hashem Asher Be'oil Moed Mizbeach Lifnei Hashem V'en Kohen Lifnei Hashem. In other words, our pasuk is contrasting with the language of the pasuk that describes the par, the sin offering that's brought the rest of the year. The sin offering that the Kohen Gadol might have to bring the rest of the year, it says that he comes to the Mizbach Ketorat Hasamim Lifnei Hashem, that he comes to the Mizbeach, which is before Hashem, Asher Be'oil Moed, which is in Oil Moed. It doesn't say that he comes before Hashem, whereas when it talks in Yom Kippur, what is the language in Yom Kippur? It says Lifnei Hashem v'chiper alav. He's in front of Hashem v'chiper alav. Right? So it mentions that the Kohen is close to the Lifnei Hashem. Okay, it says v'yatza lamizbeach asher lifnei Hashem. It doesn't say v'yatza lamizbeach v'chiper alav. It says v'yatza lamizbeach asher lifnei Hashem v'chiper alav. It's referring to the word lifnei Hashem is connected to the action of the Kohen, meaning that he was further in than the mizbeach, as opposed to when it talks about the par habal kol mitzvot, that it says that the Mizbeach was in front of Hashem, but the person was not in front of Hashem. That's why the pasuk with regard to the rest of the year, it mentions the Kohen and what he does before it mentions that the Mizbeach was Lifnei Hashem, because the Kohen had to actually stand behind the Mizbeach the rest of the year. He could only stand in front of the Mizbeach on Yom Kippur itself. And that's the and therefore we see that that on the other, when it came to the sin offering that he brought the rest of the year, he had to stand outside of the mizbeach and not within. Now it tells us that he began from up to down applying the blood. So Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught. So we learn in a Braita, where did he have to begin? We saw this in the Mishnah. He starts from the southeast, Dromit Maravit, then southwest, then Maravit Tzfonit, then northwest, and then Tzfonit Mizrachit, and then northeast. Divrei Rabbi Akiva. This is the opinion of Rabbi Akiva. Okay. Now, in our Mishnah, it told us that it begins Mizrachit Tzifonit, that he's supposed to begin northeast. In this Braita, Rabbi Akiva is saying southeast. In our Mishnah, it said he finishes southeast. In this one, it says he finishes northeast. So they're exactly the opposite. Okay, Rabbi Yossi HaGalili Omer. Rabbi Yossi HaGalili says Mikar Mizrachit Tzifonit, Tzifonit Maravit, Maravit Dromit, Dromit Mizrachit. Okay, Rabbi Yossi HaGalili says what it says in our Mishnah, that he starts not from southeast, he starts from northeast. Okay, that's what it said in our Mishnah. So our Mishnah clearly follows Rabbi Yossi HaGalili. Makom she Rabbi Yossi HaGalili matchil, sham Rabbi Akiva posek. Makom she Rabbi Akiva matchil, sham Rabbi Yossi HaGalili posek. They're exactly the opposite. The place that Rabbi Akiva says you're supposed to start is where Rabbi Yossi HaGalili says you have to end. The place where Rabbi Yossi HaGalili says you have to start is the place where Rabbi Akiva says you have to end. Because one is starting northeast, like our Mishnah says, starting northeast, and that's Rabbi Yossi HaGalili. And this Braita, Rabbi Akiva, is saying starting southeast, not northeast. Okay? Now, Dekule Alma Mia, But everybody agrees on one thing. You don't start with the corner that you run into first. Because what corner is the Kohen Gadol going to see first when he comes out of the Kodesh HaKodeshim? Southwest or northwest? Right? West. Because he's coming from the west. But he starts from the east, so he walks right by the Mizbeach. First, he walks all the way past the Mizbeach and he starts from the east. Now, what is the north-south? So Rashi explains that we learned earlier in the Mishnah that there were two opinions about where was the opening in the parochet. Right? There was one opinion that really when the Kohen enters and comes out from the parochet, he comes from the south. That was the Chachamim. He comes from the south because there are two curtains. You go in from the south, you walk the length. There were two parochot, right? You walk the length and then you go in. That was the Chachamim. Rabbi Yossi had said in the Mishnah that what? That there's only one entrance, and where is it? North, not south. So the same argument is being had here. In other words, Rabbi Yossi HaGalili says that where do you come out from when you come from the Kodesh HaKodeshim? There's only one entrance, north. There's only one parochet, north. You come out from the north. And so therefore, when you come out from the north, what are you going to hit first? The northwest corner. But you don't go for that one, you go for the northeast. Rabbi Akiva is holding like the Chachamim. That when you come out of the Kodesh HaKodeshim, where do you come from? You come from south. And if you're coming from south, that means what's the first corner you're going to hit? Southwest. But you don't do that one. You go to southeast. So that's what the Gemara is telling you.
Are you supposed to overturn?
They're going to turn. We're going to see. We're going to see that question. So, but what do you see so far? That's why the Gemara is saying that everyone agrees that you do not start with the corner you run into first. Because whether you're coming from south or north, you're definitely hitting west first, and both of them are saying to start with east, not west. So what do we do then? So the Amar Kra, why is this? So my ta'ama, what's the reason? Amar Shmuel says the Amar Kra v'yatza el hamizbeach. Because the pasuk says v'yatza el hamizbeach. He goes out to the mizbeach. What does it go out to the mizbeach? It means he has to pass the entire mizbeach first. Before he starts putting the blood on, he has to pass the mizbeach. And since he's coming from the west, that means he has to walk all the way to the east before he starts. And north and he doesn't come min because he's coming min kodesh HaKodeshim.
Toward.
What? Right. What it means is v'yatza el hamizbeach means he goes out past the mizbeach and then he starts from the outer side of the mizbeach. That's how they're understanding it. So now the question is though, wait a second. Now we're going to have a different problem, which is ad dinafik mikule mizbeach. Okay, so that's the interpretation of the pasuk. Ad dinafik mikule mizbeach. That he has to go out of the mizbeach, meaning he has to go out past the entire mizbeach before he begins his round. Okay, but according to Rabbi Akiva, we have a problem. What is it? Nakif derech yamin. Why doesn't he go right to his right? Now, what does that mean? Because look at how Rabbi Yossi HaGalili understands it, the way that we explained it before. According to Rabbi Yossi HaGalili, where do you start from? You start from northeast. Then where do you go? You go to northwest, which means you stepped to your right. You were going counterclockwise, which means you're going towards your right hand every time. Because you're facing the center, you're going towards your right hand. However, according to Rabbi Akiva, you're starting from southeast. And if you're starting from southeast, what does he say you do after southeast? You go to southwest. Wait a second, that's going towards your left. Is Rabbi Akiva lefty? Is that what he's, what's going on here? Nakif derech yamin. Why doesn't he go derech yamin? Why doesn't he go towards the right? Okay? So, that's a problem. Lema b'dirami bar Yecheskel kamipalge? Did they maybe argue about Rabbi Bar Yecheskel? What does Rabbi Bar Yecheskel, what does that have to do with this? Rabbi Bar Yecheskel, because Rabbi Bar Yecheskel said, Yam Shasa Shalomo, that when it talks in the pasuk, okay, this is a pasuk from Divrei Yamim. He quoted the pasuk that describes Yam Shel Shalomo. This was a huge structure that was a huge bowl-shaped structure that was on the back of all these oxen that Shlomo HaMelech made. And remember, the Gemara talked about how many mikvaot would be held in there, right?
Eruvin, right?
Right, yeah. In Eruvin, it talked about how many mikvaot could be contained in the enormous Yam Shel Shlomo. But the point is, it was at the Beit HaMikdash, in front of the Beit HaMikdash. It was part of the decoration of the whole structure there. So what he had was 12 oxen, 3 facing in each direction. And what does it say? When it describes it, it says, Omed al Shnei Masar Bakar. So it was on 12 oxen. Shlosha Ponim Tzafona, 3 are facing north. Ushlosha Ponim Yama, and 3 are facing west. Ushlosha Ponim Negba, 3 are facing south. Ushlosha Ponim Mizracha, and 3 are facing east. In other words, so what does that show you then? Now, if you were facing the Yam Shel Shlomo starting from the north, and then you went to the west, and then you went to the south, and then you went to the east, you are turning to your right. Okay? remember, it's not talking about someone walking around it with the thing to their left. It's talking about someone facing it, stepping around it. So that means they're always going to they're doing the hora around it, okay? So they're always walking to their right. That's how they conceive of counterclockwise as going to the right. Whereas we might think of going counterclockwise as actually going to your left, because if you're walking straight and you're going counterclockwise, you're turning to the left. But they're looking at it as you're facing the center and walking to your right. Okay, that's why they consider that turn to the right. I just want to make that visual for you, because it can be hard to understand sometimes. But that's why it says nakif derech yamin, that you should turn around to the right. So what does that mean? Why? So vayam alehem milmala. So the water was on top, or the v'chol achorehem, and all of their back was baita, was facing towards the inside. So the point is that the description goes around the right. Halamadda, what does Rabbi Bar Yecheskel say from this? That shekol pinot shata poneh, whenever you turn, lo yihu ela derech yamin. So you see that derech yamin lamizrach. So he says that you see from this that you should always turn to your right. And what does that mean for us? What that means for us is that Rabbi Akiva is in violation here. Because what is Rabbi Akiva telling us to do? He's telling us to go to the left, not to the right. So what about Rabbi Bar Yecheskel shows that even the Tanakh, even in the Navi, when it describes something, it moves to the right. So why shouldn't we should move to the right? So what should we say? More itle de Rabbi Bar Yecheskel, more letle de Rabbi Bar Yecheskel. Maybe that's the machloket. Rabbi Akiva says, I don't agree with that interpretation. That's not what the pasuk means. It's not telling you to always turn to the right. And so therefore I say turning to the left is fine. No, the Gemara says, Lo, techule alma itlo de Rabbi Bar Yecheskel. Everybody agrees with Rabbi Bar Yecheskel that you're supposed to turn to the right. Everybody does. They're arguing about something else. Mor savar yalfinan penim michutz. Umar savar lo yalfinan penim michutz. That one holds that we compare the outside to the inside, and one says that we don't compare them. In other words, that when it comes to the outer mizbeach, okay, there you have to go around to the right. Everybody agrees. Okay? But when it's the inner mizbeach, it's a different story. We don't have the same principle. Why? Because the inner mizbeach is so small that it doesn't even really necessitate the person to walk around. It's not of the same caliber of walking around. So that halacha I agree on. He says, I agree, you have to turn to the right, but that's only the mizbeach hachitzon. That's only for the outer altar. For the inner altar, that halacha doesn't apply. So then the Gemara asks, for Rabbi Akiva, but still, that's not a satisfactory answer. Why? Because that just tells you, why does Rabbi Akiva not require you to go to the right? But why does he say to go to the left? Does it hurt us to go to the right? Why can't we go to the right? So the answer, but you're telling me it's optional then. You don't have to go to the right when you're inside the Kodesh. That's only a halacha that applies to outside. But still, why can't he go to the right? So the answer is like this. Rabbi Akiva will tell you, he says, because there's another problem here. Namely, that really, what should the Kohen Gadol have to do? He should have to start with the corner that he sees first. And what's the corner that he sees first? Is going to be, according to Rabbi Akiva, the southwest corner. So the southwest corner is the one that he really should start with. So since it should be really the southwest corner, because en ma'avirin ala mitzvot, because we don't pass over mitzvot. But he did, he has, right? But still, because the pasuk says v'yatzal lamizbeach, he has to pass it, but he's really not supposed to. So va'amai lo avid, and why doesn't he do it? Mishum dechtiv v'yatzal lamizbeach, because it says he has to pass the mizbeach. So he's forced to violate en ma'avirin ala mitzvot. What's the case where you're forced to violate in ma'avirin ala mitzvot in halacha normally? Is, for instance, if you accidentally take your shel rosh out before the shel yad, you're ma'avir ala mitzvah, you have to put it aside. That's why they say you're supposed to put the shel yad so that you take it first. You don't want to be ma'avir ala mitzvot, but if you did, you're not allowed to put on the shel rosh before the shel yad. Okay, so here, the halacha requires you to be ma'avir ala mitzvah. You must pass the mizbeach and then go back. But you feel bad about that, so to speak, right? So he says, we have to go out. So you had to go all the way to the southeast. But the fact is, you neglected that poor southwest. It was supposed to be first, right? So what do? So then you go back to the one that you skipped over and you give it what it was supposed to have. Okay? In other words,
so optimize these routes so it makes his job easier.
So tomorrow, in tomorrow's daf, it continues with two more interpretations of the machloket between Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yossi Aglili, or two or three more interpretations of their machloket. It will take us through half of the next amud, so we're not going to do it now. But for now, the conclusion, the provisional conclusion, the tentative conclusion of the Gemara is that the distinction between the two is that Rabbi Akiva says that first corner that you saw needs to be addressed. So for Rabbi Yossi Aglili, it's no problem, because since he says you come out from the north and you go to the east, going back to the first corner that you saw is what you do by going to your right. There's no problem. Right? But for Rabbi Akiva, doing the same thing necessitates that you turn to your left. And once you're already turning to your left, you continue in that direction around the rest of the Mizbeach.